Oh, goody. My struggle this week, I was really, what's the right word? Convicted by some things um, that I heard last week about microaggressions that are probably things that I said to Gloria, um, or certainly could have been things that I said to Gloria about, food, tamales and salsa and so forth, uh, from my perspective would have been because I, I like Mexican food and have been through kind of her journey of not being able to eat it because I couldn't deal with the peppers, which thank God has gone back away again. But anyway, um, so having that becoming something coming from me with absolute um, respect and no, certainly nothing about those kinds of comments from me would have come from any place of being surprised that anyway, just from that whole thing. And then the other thing was I've been listening to the podcast, Marie, that you recommended. And the episode that I listened to this week, there was a Black woman talking about this idea that certainly I was raised with, which is we don't talk about color. And that was the most respectful thing that we could do, was to just never mention it. And so that's kind of how I was raised. But this woman was saying, that's really, and it is kind of silly when you think about it, because of course we see color. And of course we all have an ethnic background that we are proud of and that we want to be recognized for, which includes, how we dress and what we eat and how we worship and all those different kinds of things that are different from one ethnic community to another. And they're beautiful things and things that we should recognize and celebrate about each other. Um, so that just sort of conflicts then with this idea that, but if I talk about, the food from your tradition or the way you do your hair or anything like that, it's perceived as a microaggression because I'm a gray-haired white woman, and so maybe I am coming from a place of, and so I've been really searching my soul. Is that really in me coming from a place of unconscious racial bias, or is it coming from a place of genuine, respectful interest in someone else's culture and family experience? And I don't know the right answer to that, but it makes me very sad to know that I hurt someone that I consider to be a friend and someone that I absolutely deeply respect in every way. So that's been my struggle this week. Josh, your turn.
Oh, thank you. I feel like middle school. I'm the last to get picked. Hey, thank you all for sharing that. I think that's marvelous stuff that you've shared. And Natalie, let me just let me be your pastor for a moment and say that it sounds to me like you had really good introspection time this week, and introspection should not be punitive. Introspection is good for our advancement on Maslow's hierarchy to self-actualization. So I would, my pastor sensibilities tell me to not be on you or anybody, to not, that introspection should not be punitive. I preached a sermon on that just 2 weeks ago, correct? So, but it should lead us to a place of being able to make some admissions and some thought process on things. And also, I know absolutely that we will always be more difficult on ourselves than what is fair. And so, and I'm beginning to adopt that filter by which, are there those things in me that I may make offhanded comments? The knapsack article on white privilege, put me back in check again, thinking about male privilege. If any of you who watched the vice presidential debate, one of the outcomes of that was Kamala Harris talking about, I'm speaking, right? And the challenge, the perpetual challenge of women getting interrupted by men because, I'm the man, I got something to say, and you have something to say too, but it's not anywhere as near as important as me cutting you off so that you hear what I have to say, right? So those are all things that, are great milestones along the way. Cairns, 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 like trail markers along the way to remind us of where we're going and from where we've been. So again, that doesn't mean that we all get a pass and get let off. We should be held accountable for our words and our actions, but also not to live in a state of self-punishment. That being said, let me tell you about my self-punishment this week. I'm kidding. My name's Josh, and I want to share something that was revealed to me in the reading of the knapsack article on white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack. And so a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to share something very personal with y'all, and I'm recording it. So, am I on mute? Am I good? Okay, good. You can hear me. I'm sharing something very personal with you. And I know that I'm recording it, and it'll be on Facebook for the whole world to hear. So, while it's something personal, it's not something that I'm not all that, afraid to share. Other than getting to details. And I don't want what I'm about to share to be disruptive of the point that I'm trying to make. But a couple of weeks ago, I was looking for a support group and researching the issue of support that I needed. I came across a whole laundry list of support groups and that were focused on a 12-step program. And I said, okay, well, I found this one particular support group and I want to go. They've got a meeting at 1 o'clock. I want to go to it. And I did. And it was on Zoom, which I felt is great because I don't have to go and be in person. I don't have to be anywhere within the community. And I can go and stay in my jammies and join via Zoom. And little did I know that the Zoom information I got was from a meeting that was taking place in New York City, which was even better for me. But little did I know was this particular support group was for African-American community. And so there were 27 persons of color of the African-American community on this Zoom call support group, and then little old white bread. And so I didn't unvideo I didn't turn the video on my camera because I was really aware of, holy smokes, this is a double support group. It's a support group for an issue as much as it is a support group for people of color who have to embrace this particular issue in more challenging ways than I do. And so I emailed the moderator and I said, hey, I found this thing by accident, I didn't realize, is it okay if I stay? And of course the moderator said, everyone is welcome, everything's good, we're glad you're here. But I never took my video on because I didn't want to feel like I was encroaching on a safe space, that there was another, white guy coming in on the safe space. So after that meeting, I said, I think I'll go to another one later tonight. And so I found another meeting, this time in Alberta, Canada. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to this one. This is going to be all right. I don't, from what I can read, it's not anything at all about, you know, on the color of my skin. Here I go. Well, again, little did I know that it was a women's group. So it was a support group for the topic that I was looking for, but it was made up of 20 something women. And again, I kept my camera off, and I emailed the moderator and I said, I am so sorry. I'm the only guy here. I didn't realize. And they were like, yes, very supportive. We're glad that you're here, you know. And again, I kept the camera off because I didn't, you know, even though my name very clearly said in both groups, I've got a very white name, a white male name. That being said, going through the unpacking the invisible knapsack and looking through the various privileges there. And I want to lead off with that article because I want to conclude our time looking at the Facing Racism Study Guide. So I'm going to lead off with us looking at the white privilege unpacking the invisible knapsack article. And on the second page, let me share my screen. On the second page of that was, let me get this set up here. On the second page of that were a variety of ways in which the author focused on things that she began to understand that being a person in that white privilege had that these were all things that are unthought of aspects, or I'm trying to not use her wording just yet, but these were all things that for her were not a challenge in having to explore and being a person of color. Now, on my document, as you see, I highlighted a bunch of yellow. These are things that I particularly could identify with or noted from. But I know that I walked away from reading this article, in particular, these 26 items that she mentioned. I know that I was able to walk away from that with a mindset of, there is so much of my world that I get to glide through that I don't have to give thought to, unlike both women and people of color. And again, that was reminding me of these two support groups that I had visited a couple of weeks ago. So what about for y'all? And I don't want to get too far down in the document, but you know, looking through some of these, were there any of these that as you were reading them that were some takeaway points that were like, oh yeah, I could really identify with that? The one of the ones for me was number 4. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. That is something I absolutely know, that I can go walking and gliding through a store and no one's going to clutch their purse, nor am I going to have an employee following me around going, may I help you, sir? May I help you, sir? May I help you, sir? Or just staring me down. Those are things that I know I can enter and have my whole time being in the store, and for whatever reason, I will be invisible on the security cameras. That's what I have come to understand as one aspect of privilege for myself. How about for any of y'all? Were there any of these that might have stood out for you, or that triggered something for you? Go ahead, Betty.
The number 22 was one of the ones. I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having coworkers on the job suspect that I got it because of race.
Say a little bit more about that, about why that one clicked for you.
Well, because for a couple of reasons. One is when I was in a hiring position at the university that I worked in, and we tried very hard to have a diverse group of employees, and employees that come from different backgrounds have different ways of doing things, different maybe senses of time, all kinds of differences. that are not the norm in a predominantly white working environment. And so when some of those would show up in a person that was a minority, then, you know, basically in the back of everyone's mind was, yeah, this person's not really, you know, can't say that for a fact, but I know that there were those questions.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think that the idea of what you're talking about there reminds me of of especially when you said tardiness. You know, I've certainly had a whole range of people who have different characteristics and work habits that were you know, unappreciated. But tardiness is one of those where if I have you know, a person who is white, who is habitually late, right? My internal thoughts are different than someone who's from a particular race who's habitually late, right? One it gets ascribed to, oh, that's just this individual. The other is, well, that's the whole race that is like that. And I think that's a good example of what you're talking about there. Who else? Anybody else want to mention something from this list? All right, Natalie.
Mine was number 14. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. And the corollary to that is I can screw up in a challenging situation without having exactly what you just said. Everybody go, oh, well, that's just people of that race, or just incompetent, or whatever, you know, whatever the negative characteristic is. And as a woman, you know, 20 years ago, there was a certain amount of that, you know, I need to do well in this situation because people are looking at me as a representative of all women. And that's kind of silly, but that's what people do. So I think that has faded away for white women, but I think it's very much an issue for people of color.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. And who else? Pick them from one of these that seem to make some connection with you or that you recognized before. Alex?
In college, I had a nasty habit of not updating my registration or inspection stickers on my car. And I'd say there are probably 4 times in 2 years that I got pulled over on campus at A&M. And I knew exactly what I was getting pulled over for every time. I knew exactly how the process would work out. And I didn't ever, you know, I was embarrassed that I had been pulled over again for this thing I should have taken care of, but I never at any point thought that would be the end of me or feared that anything else would happen or that I'd be asked to get out of the car or anything like that. The one time that they did have 2 police come, like they called another cop to come. Later, they said I was behaving nervously in the car, but I had a roommate of mine who is African-American in the car with me. Don't have any idea if that's why they did it really or not. But that was the only time that I've ever had backup called on me was the time that I had an African-American in the car with me.
Wow. Wow. As a keeping solidarity with you, brother, as a perennial, I will get to changing that inspection sticker when I get to it, usually 4 to 5 months down the line. And when the state of Texas started saying, you know what, your month is September, no matter when, if you change it in August, you're still in September. Yeah, I've pushed that about 7 or 8 months. But again, as just as you're saying, as a part of privilege, that I really don't have to worry. I don't worry about driving down the roads in my neighborhood and in my car and my skin with an outdated registration sticker, because I'm not worried about getting pulled over because of that, when that wouldn't be the case in other neighborhoods or persons with different skin type. Good. How about one more?
All right, well, I'll go if nobody else
Go
does.
ahead, Marie.
I think number 24, that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. So I was listening to another podcast today that was, it's Everything Happens, which is a very good podcast. Anyway, she was interviewing, Kate Bowler was interviewing Ray Hinton, who was wrongly convicted of and sentenced to death, and has since been freed through innocence work through Equal Justice Initiative, the Brian Stevenson's organization. And he told the story of how he was informed that he was when he was arrested. The detective basically says, I don't know whether you shot this man or not. I don't really care. You're going to be convicted. You know why you're going to be convicted? You're going to be convicted because you're Black in Alabama, and you're going to be tried by a white judge in front of a white jury, and you're going to be found guilty whether you did it or not. And I don't care. And that just brought that whole thing home, that, you know, that's not anything we even have to think about. And the same thing with medical, you know, how much Black people are not, there's so many errors in like medical reference things because it's not calibrated by race, or it is calibrated by race and it's wrong, and they get the wrong drugs, and they get the wrong because it's calibrated for something else. It's an issue with women as well on that particular thing. But anyway, that one really is just something I never really thought about that much until recently, you know, starting to think about those things.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I just wanted to add on that number 24 with the medical help. There was an event, I think 2 weeks ago, where a First Nations woman in Canada in the Quebec province was receiving medical care, didn't think she was getting good medical care, and recorded. She died in the hospital, but was Facebook live streaming as the people caring for her were calling her names and talking poorly about her because she was a First Nations woman, saying she was gonna, you know, she was only good for making babies, and saying she wasn't worth saving, that sort of stuff. And so that's, yeah.
That's horrible. Alex, if you see the link to the article, would you send that to me? If you find it later on, you see the link to the article or whatever what your source was. That's not out as a matter of that I don't believe you. Just adding to the list of things to read and review. I'd like to see that. I don't like to see it, but I'd like to see. Oh, dang, man, he's quick. Man, leave it to a millennial, man. Right there at the fingertips every time. You know, one of the other things on the next page in that article it was talking about was the idea of privilege. And I think one of the things that took me today in leading it and reading it was, I'm reading a couple of highlighted quotes here. This is second page, middle column, or page 3 on the middle column, I guess. It says, such privilege simply confers dominance of one's race or sex. I want then to distinguish between earned strength and unearned power conferred systematically. Power from unearned privilege can look like strength when it is in fact permission to escape or to dominate. Ideally, it is an unearned entitlement. At present, since only few have it, it is an unearned advantage for them. So what's this idea of rethinking through the process of privilege, whether male privilege or white privilege, thinking through this idea of privilege in terms of earned or unearned, earned strength or unearned power? How do you understand that? What is that? How would you explain that to a middle school student? And I'm not picking on you, Alex, because you have to. You're paid to explain that to a middle school student. But how would any of you explain that idea of earned strength or unearned power to a teenager? How would you explain some of that? What was that? What did that mean to you? Go ahead, Rita.
I'll give it a go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I think I would start out by saying earned strength is because you have studied and given your time and your attention to a subject and have been neutral in that study and are able to relay the information about it to others without implying your prejudice. And I think something that's unearned is because I'm a white girl from Indiana, I know everything about Hoosiers. And that's just an assumption. And I think that's what we tend to do. Something that you really haven't earned. It's just you flaunt it.
You don't know everything about Hoosiers?
Not quite.
Okay, good. How about somebody else? Earned versus unearned, especially in terms of white privilege. What are we talking about? What does unearned strength or unearned power look like in terms of white privilege? How would you explain that to a teenager? Go ahead, Betty. It's okay. We're all sharing here. We're all making our way through this together.
For unearned, it would, I think, if you have a place of power or privilege, it's just given to you. You did not do a single thing in the world. It's kind of like our concept of grace and forgiveness from God. It's just conferred. You did nothing to gain it. Whereas the true strength would be that this is your character, or, as I guess Rita said earlier, you have studied, you have earned, you have done something to have gained that position of strength or power.
That's great. That's great. That's great. I'm going to look something up because I want to add on to that, Betty. I'm going to look something up on the internet. I'm going to try and pull a millennial here. But while I do, I am going to pick on Dr. Moore. How would you explain it to a 4-year-old?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, we try to have these conversations in our house. I'm not quite sure. I don't know.
I am.
Yeah. How do you explain it to Henry?
We don't play with guns in our house. We don't have firearms in our house. We don't have toy guns in our house. But I feel pretty confident that Henry could play with a cap gun no matter what it looked like, of any color, and he wouldn't have anything to fear from the sheriffs that drive through our neighborhood. I know that's not always the case.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think you have a point there. You absolutely, Henry, your son, could do that in the front yard without ever having to worry about that, both at your house or some other house here in the suburbs. That might not be the case in the same geographical locations for a person of color or a child of color. Absolutely. I was thinking about that, and Betty, and something you were saying about, it was a few weeks ago during the Republican National Committee Convention, and the president had a a citizenship oath-taking event in the White House. And I was thinking about earned and unearned. And in my adult life, I have purposefully tried and done a lot of work to try to explain to myself and to my son what I think it means to be a citizen in the United States. I was born here. I have never, not for one day in my life, ever had to take an exam, a citizenship exam. Now, in 7th grade, I took a Texas citizenship exam, but that's a different story. But I never had to take an oath just, as you said, it was conferred upon me because I was born in Amarillo, Texas. You are an American, and that's it. Well, when I was watching that the oath taking opportunity for at the White House, those who were becoming naturalized, becoming citizens, had to take this oath, and the oath is, and I wanted to look the words up. This is the oath. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. So you want to talk about earned and unearned. Being an American, I didn't have to take that, but I get all the privileges thereof. And because I didn't take it and I'm American, I can contest any bit of that. I don't know, and I've been doing a lot of thinking the last couple of months. I don't know that I could swear this allegiance, that I could swear this oath, or I might have some scruples with that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law. There's no asterisk there about selective service. It is the sentence as it is. If the United States were to compel me to bear arms, I'm not a person who will use weaponry. So, I don't know if that's something that I can say. And if you're applying to be a citizen of this country, you must, right? So you also must know all this other stuff about United States history and how our government works that is not required for me being born in Amarillo, Texas. So I take that idea of earned and unearned, earned citizenship versus unearned citizenship. And again, part of my adult life has been trying to figure out, why am I proud to fly a flag on the front of my house? And what does it mean when I have expressions of patriotism? It's been a cognitive exercise, a cerebral exercise I've been doing for 20 something years, when I didn't have to. Not one point in my life have I ever had to have that cerebral exercise about what it means to be a citizen in the United States, a patriotic citizen in the United States. And the same goes for white privilege, right? I have thought a lot over the last 15 years, what does it mean to be white? What are those things that have been awarded to me, that I have unearned privileges that have been awarded to me based on the color of my skin versus some other thing, the degrees that have been conferred upon me through hard work and study, the myth of meritocracy in a country. And she talks about that a little bit here, the idea of meritocracy, that everybody gets theirs because they work hard to get it. That isn't a truth. We absolutely do many times get rewarded for hard work, but there's plenty of things that people of privilege, whether it's male or female, or whether it's male or white or heterosexual, there are things that get awarded to you just because. That's because of the institutions of how we have structured ourselves over hundreds of years. And I think that that's sort of that same sort of idea, right? What gets conferred upon us, but versus what is it that we even take for granted, right? If I hadn't spent the last 20 years thinking about what does it mean to be a patriot, what does it mean to be a citizen of the United States, I would be a 43-year-old white guy in the United States saying, I was born in America, so that makes me American. What does it mean? What's the value of being American? Well, I'm American. It's the value of being white. Well, I'm white. You're not. That I think that's that sort of cerebral work that Peggy, the author Peggy, is pushing pushing us towards, especially in the conclusion of the article there. If you look at the very last page, and I'm going to share the screen once more so you can see it. The very last page of her article, she has, and I really appreciate. I've never seen a scholar do this, which she put like 3 pages in there about how best to use this material and how she approaches her. It's not pedagogy, andragogy, and pedagogy in Latin is specifically is related to your theories of teaching children, where andragogy is your approach to teaching adults. That's something that I just learned recently. But this is her andragogy about how she approaches this work. And I love in this last paragraph, some people get the idea of systemic privilege and ask, but what can I do? My answer, she says, you can use unearned advantage to weaken systems of unearned advantage. And she goes on, I'll let you read that at your leisure. I just wanted to identify it to you there. And so y'all can go look it up. But I think that's the idea of when we come to realize some of those things that have been awarded to us that we didn't earn, that we benefit from, that we didn't earn, that were just simply given to us, then there's also I think both a responsibility and a power that comes along with it of how we use that power and respond to dismantle the systems that continue to perpetuate that power. Does that make sense? Y'all jiving with me there? All right. I just kind of went on a little soapbox there. So you are free to respond, reply, argue, whatever you would like to say. Natalie, it looks like you were saying something. Are you talking to us or to Bob?
I'm talking to the cat who is complaining about how it's almost time for the next can of cat food. But I do, one of the things that I, from this reading this week was this idea of property ownership, of an education coming from, you know, a long, deep history and from the GI Bill and all of that. You know, my parents, grandparents were able to get a loan to buy a house. My parents and grandparents were admitted to a university and had, you know, my father in particular had GI Bill funds that paid for him to get a degree in geology. Now, once you have that loan, once you get into that university, you have to work. You have to work to pay the loan off. And if you don't pay it off, they will take it back, the house back. If you don't work to pass the classes, you won't get the degree, you know. So, but the fact that you got the opportunity to do that work in the first place, that's the unearned privilege. And you then get to either succeed or fail from that point. But if you're the wrong color, or if you were the wrong color, you didn't even get that opportunity. And some of that has gotten better, but some of it hasn't. Did you even get in the door to even have an opportunity to try to show what you could do and succeed or fail?
Yeah, and Natalie, and that's baked in this Constitution of the United States of America. I mean, that's baked into the very words that make up who we are as a nation. But even more than that, when you think about did you even ever get an opportunity? Well, we haven't even hit the 100-year mark in which I don't think we've hit the 100-year mark in which we have had that, at least in public school, the same race, the integration of public schools within our country, and even within gender as well. you know, if we're not at 100 years, we're not too far past 100 years as far as for, I mean, the education doors have always been open and available to persons who are male and persons who are white. Within this country in particular, but those institutions, access to those institutions have been the time in which those opportunities have been available, those doors have been opened. It's just very small on the grand scale of the history of our nation, and I think she led off in this article talking about. Nope, it was the other article on facing racism for this week. They led off in this idea of economics and wealth generation, and what you're talking about, inherited wealth, right? I mean, we certainly have plenty of robust examples of inherited wealth passed down through generations, but and while you and someone who's exactly you and Bob, someone who's exactly your income, exactly your educational credentials, and exactly your age from another race were to walk into a bank, y'all both have equal opportunity to apply for and maybe even both get the exact same loan, but the systems over 400 plus years have greased the skids in a way that makes it easier, I think, for persons who are white, who are privileged by their white race, to not have to, they have to work hard so that the loan doesn't default, but in many ways didn't have to work as hard or don't have to work as hard as persons and other people of color to pay off that same exact loan. Does that make sense? It does not make sense. All right, Marie, go ahead.
No, that makes sense. Another one, this has been in the news recently, and many of you may have heard it, but Black people in particular who are putting their house up for sale or want to refinance their mortgage are finding that if they de-Black their house, the appraisal comes in tens, 20, 50, $100,000 higher than if it looks like a Black family lives there. And they are intentionally, there are actually, little, networks of people who like to teach people how to de-Black their house to improve their appraisals, which is just infuriating.
I've never heard of that. And again, I would say, like Alex, if you see a reference to an article, I certainly would love to read that. I hadn't thought about that. Peggy, I think in the Peggy McIntosh's article, talks about the devaluing of culture, as a person who is privileged from my white race, I don't have to have a value for other cultures. I'm not pressed to have to understand or to value and respect the culture of other persons. And therefore, you could walk into my house today, sight unseen. I didn't have to de-white my house in order for what you're saying, in order for it to appraise well. That's fascinating. Rita?
I think one of the things that bothers me is our prejudging when we see a successful Black person, when they have earned the right to drive that Volvo, and we say, I wonder where they got that, and we don't give them the same credence that we would to another young male, a white male in the car.
I mean, I don't give anybody who drives a Volvo any credence. So there you go, Rita. I kid. No, you're right? So you're seeing two people pull up at the stoplight, exact same car, two different races behind it, right? And the inherent bias pops in there. And I think we talked about that a little bit about, prejudice versus bias. And there's this, that the unvoiced bias that kind of plays into the devaluing of the person behind the steering wheel. Yeah.
I started reading.
Go ahead.
One of the things I caught right off the top, it talked about the legacy of racism. And I always think of the word legacy as being something that's passed down, that's good and tangible, and something to be proud of. And yet when they associate that with racism, then it negates all that altogether. At least in my mind. I thought it was a poor choice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Julie, what you got tonight?
Well, this is all kind of interesting. This is my first time to attend this group, and thank you for allowing me to come. I've read some, and I don't have a reference to provide. Some of this I've seen on television, but there's a basic mechanic that's involved in racism, and what I'm going to title is discernment. It is a natural function of the human existence, and really in the animal kingdom, to look at something and decide what it is, and then to associate aspects of that particular thing that they're observing and define it and place it into categories. Okay, so that means that if you think about it, when we look at another group of people, we immediately, by nature, look at who that is, and we categorize them. We categorize them just generally, male, female, other. We categorize them short, tall, fat, skinny. I mean, that list goes on and on and on. It is a natural function. What we are discussing is that what we're trying to do is reach to a higher plane and not make those discernments based on what we have learned from our cultural and societal norms and thoughts. The thing, and I can speak just to digress a little in my case, I can say that one of the things that, having been white male, the comparison to where I was and where I am has taught me a little bit about the way a subgroup is treated compared to a higher, more privileged group. Examples, quickly. As a male, when I would walk through an airport, other men, women, other people would walk around me and not come within the normal accepted distance in the Western culture. As a woman, as a trans woman, men will walk over me in an airport now. The other thing is that, and I have been, even to the point of being pushed down, that never happened to me, ever, as male. Another thing that's a common function is that men talk over women. That never happened to me as male. My friends, the friends that I have left after transitioning, they would never talk over me as a male. But I mean, they will not only interrupt me now, but they will completely run over me and not even listen to what I have to say. So the point is with that is simply this. What we're trying to address is those automatic cues that have been programmed into us, and trying to overcome them and redirect what our desires are for society. And because they are unconscious controls that have been programmed into us by our culture and our parents and our existence, this is extremely difficult to stop. I mean, in my case, you say, well, what did you learn last week? Well, I've got to learn when I begin to observe and look at people, I've got to switch off that natural process right then. As I look at someone and not allow it to go on auto. And this is a learning process. And I don't think it's something that you learn overnight. And I don't think it's something that you can permanently change. I think it's a conscious thing because the way we are programmed as humans. And anyway, that's what I see in this. I see it as more, it's not just racism. It's much more mechanical, and it's much more deep than simply looking at it in terms of black and white and all of this other. I know that's the topic. I know that's where we're trying to emphasize, but I mean, with this effort to attract some of the LGBTQ community into the church, it's the same function. That's all it is. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing, Julie. And I mean, you certainly have a perspective that that I don't have, and I'm grateful for you sharing that. And thanks for being here tonight. Something I was thinking, and I know our time, so we're going to be coming to a close here. And let me encourage you to be looking at the Facing Racism Study Guide. We've got just a couple more weeks, 2 more Sundays. And so take note of what's ahead. I sent out the docket for this coming week. We're going to be looking at lesson 6 on the Facing Racism Study Guide, as well as PCUSA's Bearing Witness. And so take a look at those on what they are, how it looks, read through them. We'll be getting through those a little bit more. Under Bearing Witness, next week we'll be talking a little bit more on Black Lives Matter and what that is in relation to us, to faith. And so we want to be mindful about that. Read it in advance. Julie, or something you said there, that the idea of categorization, right? I mean, there's just certainly trying to categorize, I think, is what's distinguishable about in the animal kingdom about humans, right? Is that we have this ability to be able to and a desire to categorize, right? And classify, we do this in various different ways. And then we ascribe various aspects on a scoring rubric to how it is that we've categorized various different things. And I think I came to realize that about 4 or 5 years. I've known that, don't get me wrong. I realized that back in college, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I began to realize the news reporters that I pay more attention to. And when I'm scrolling through the news, right, we have 4 local channels, Fox, CBS, ABC, NBC, right? There are 4 local news channels that deliver us nightly news, evening news, and whatnot. Well, I thought to myself, well, which of those 4 do you like to receive your news from on a nightly basis? I'm I've always been, since I was a kid, more of an NBC guy. So I get my news from my local news from NBC, KXAN. As an institution, but there have always been in my life various different reporters that I tend to want to listen to. And I came to know, wow, for the most of your life, you have really paid attention to those who are more like me, white male reporters. And I tended to listen to a lot more from white male reporters, and have looked up to them. Dan Rather is a journalist. I'm an admirer of Dan Rather, who's a journalist, empire of his own rights and right and accord. But what about you? And you don't have to answer this, but when you're flipping through the channels and you see a news reporter and it lands on a person of color, do you change the channel to find another reporter who looks more like you, or do you land on and stay with and remain loyal is not the right word, but a constant viewer, a regular viewer of news reporters who are not like you in the same race and or gender? And again, you don't have to answer that, but go ahead, Diane. I see you waving at
Well,
me.
I was going to say I'm a KXAN fan myself, and I know I tend to always watch both the local and then of course the national NBC News, and of course Chester Holt is a Black man, and that has no bearing on me. I just, I kind of like the NBC News. I feel like it's a little more middle of the road versus far left or far right, like some of the stations might tend to be, or at least that's my interpretation of it. And in the morning, I really like the Today Show. And of course, there's several segments of that Today Show now. There's like 4 different hours of it. But, again, you've got 2 women reporters, you've got a Black male reporter, you've got a Black weatherman, you've got a couple, you've got Jenna and Hoda later on. I love Jenna Bush Hager. She's, from the Austin area and often talks about Texas and Austin. And I don't know. I just happen to like all of their personalities. Their color or their gender doesn't really do anything to me, but, and I've tried some of the other morning shows, and I always go back to the NBC.
Well, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. And I think that, yes, all of that. And I think that part of what I was thinking about as Julie was speaking is, in what ways are we intentional about paying attention to the voices that are coming to us that are different, from a different perspective in the mainstream from us, right? So if I am intentional about trying to be more cerebral as to why am I a patriotic citizen of the United States, then I also want to be more cerebral about and intentional about getting information from persons who don't look like the person looking at me in the mirror. I want to lean forward and pay more attention from a female correspondent, a person of color correspondent, a person from the LGBTQIA plus community. Those are because they're bringing a perspective that I know that is not inherent within me, that I want to try to pay attention to, because I imagine it will probably challenge me to think about something that I've not thought about before. But as much as 4 to 5 years ago, I would flip through the channels to try to find a news source of someone who's going to speak to me because they look like me. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's something for us to think about as we go forward. Same thing about picking our physicians as well, and who we go to get our services from. We tend to go to folks who look like me, and who look, et cetera, et cetera. I'm running out of breath, and I'm sorry, because I want to be mindful about everyone's time. And but any final thoughts before we move to our closing prayer? Julie, go ahead. You get the last word.
I'd like to, I'll try to be very brief. The interesting thing, the last study that I read had 8 points, or actually it had 8 points of similarity when they compared the animal kingdom to humankind. In other words, these aspects are common in the animal kingdom and humankind as far as this discernment and categorization. But then they said one of the most interesting things about this is only humankind has a 9th aspect of categorization. And this is a very difficult thing. And what it is that humans tend, after they've made these categories, to select one group, subgroup within a group to put pressure on and separate the main group from the small group.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. And it is a function of, I studied sociology when I was in college, and that that aspect of humankind and that social function, if you consider that part of our basic program, which the study suggested, that's a very serious accusation about us. Because what it basically means, and it explains one point, every society on the face of this earth has racial prejudice in it. It's not just America. It is every country in the world. And for the most part, it's much worse in other countries because they're not trying to control it.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel my study of Darwin triggering in on my head, and I want to process that a little bit more. Rita, I saw you waving, and I'll let you go, and I really want to close us out after that.
I just have a technical question.
Yes, ma'am.
How do I save the links that were sent to me without jumping off of the Zoom?
You asked me to email it to the class.
Okay, please do that.
Yes.
And it is so ordered. I'll make sure to do that. Thank you. Good technical question. All right, let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the beauty of this day, for the day in which you have graced us with food, with air to breathe, water to drink, people to visit. We thank you, God, that you granted us an opportunity to gather together and to worship you, and that tonight we have the freedom of being able to pause and to consider the ways in which our society is structured and the ways in which we can reflect better your desires and your purposes for your people. We pray that you would guide us into the evening, wherever it is that we may go. We pray that you would give us good rest and help us always, oh God, to remember the ways in which we are privileged and advantaged, whether earned or unearned, and help us always, God, to use whatever unearned advantages and privileges we have to dismantle those systems that oppress and injure others. We pray these in the name of Jesus the Christ, our everlasting Prince of Peace. Amen.